And China, as you know, is now a major country on the international stage and knows how important credibility is. So China has stood by these words. China has made promises it can keep, and it has been keeping these commitments and these promises.
And so the world is watching and, pursuing peace in this conflict, the Ukraine conflict and conflict between Palestine and Israel. Different countries have been trying to come to the ceasefire agreement.
Really wish I had a crystal ball that can tell you exactly what's going to happen.
A technically challenging mission here, but China is not alone in this endeavor. We do have international payloads this time, and one of the international payloads is from Pakistan. Its first ever satellite mission, CubeSat, was on board the Chang'e 6.
Hello and welcome to InferTalks, a podcast where I put you in the room with some of the biggest thought leaders from around the world. Today I'm joined by two leading news anchors from CGTN, Zhong Shi and Wang Mangmang. Zhong, Wang, welcome to InferTalks.
Great to be here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. We appreciate this platform to communicate.
Wonderful. All right, Zhong and Wang, let's deep dive into our conversation, and I have plenty of questions for both of you on plenty of serious issues that we want to cover today. Zhong, starting from you, starting from the very visit of the President Xi that has recently just concluded to Europe, and he had an opportunity to visit Hungary, Serbia, as well as France. And right in the midst of it, we also saw President Xi actually, do discuss about the plan of, bringing peace to or between Russia and Ukraine. My question is, it actually comes back again at a time when Europe and particularly Ukraine is planning another set of counteroffensive, or one could say, an attempt to defend itself in its ongoing conflict with Russia. And critics might say, a timing of this might be quite critical. What do you think, or what do you really see from inside of China that what is President Xi trying to achieve through this move at this very point?
Yeah, I think this visit is being, misperceived by some in the West. The timing is important because it coincides with big anniversaries of some of the countries visited by the Chinese president. I know there has been a lot of attention on China's response to the Ukraine crisis, or China's position on the Ukraine crisis on this trip overtaken by the Chinese president. But I would like to point out this was just one topic, one of many topics that the Chinese president sought to discuss with European leaders on this very important trip. This trip, I can tell you, is about engaging another very important source of strength in our multipolar world, and that's Europe. If you look at what the president did on this trip, he went to three countries, as you mentioned, France, Serbia, Hungary, at a time when China increasingly values head of state diplomacy. So the emphasis is a little different with each country. In France, you see a lot of personal interactions between the two leaders, formal and informal occasions, very private conversations. That is because they had mutual trust to begin with. After all, France has been credited by China as the nation that is a gateway to the West, at the forefront of China's relations with the West. So the presidents took the opportunity of this trip to really build on a personal relationship that has grown over the years. You would notice that President Macron of France took the opportunity to appreciate and get this, the open-mindedness of the visiting Chinese president to the topics he had in mind, and this would include the Ukraine crisis. And I think it's very clear that President Macron got what he needed to hear, assurances from China, assurances on China's neutrality on the issue. So this is the leg in France. With Serbia and Hungary, both countries took the opportunity to elevate ties with China. Serbia decided to build a shared community, a community with a shared future with China. In the case of Hungary, they upgraded their ties to a all-weather comprehensive strategic partnership. So you see, overall, Ukraine, of course, was a topic in this trip, but this trip was also about China's relations with Europe, about China wants to instill more certainty and stability at a time when both are lacking in this world.
Now, Zhong, I want to circle back and put another question, a lead question related to this. We've seen the initial peace plan, being discussed on the table and being proposed by China itself. But what are some possible and probable scenarios that you think could really look like taking the peace plan forward? Could you sort of, being more imaginative with it and sort of share with our audience what could that really look like apart from the initial peace plan that is already in place?
Usama, I really wish I had a crystal ball. I can tell you exactly what's going to happen. But if we're being perfectly honest here, over 2 years into this conflict, it's becoming increasingly difficult to really get a good look of the end of the tunnel here, or what that end of the tunnel looks like. It's really regrettable. This has gone on a lot longer than all of us probably had anticipated. And sometimes I think with all of those demands from the rest of the world that China do more, it gets a little bewildering. It almost seems that China had a part to play in this crisis. So let's get the facts straight first. First of all, China did not create the Ukraine crisis. China is not a party to the Ukraine crisis. That being said, China did not sit idly by or benefit from how long the crisis has gone on. Others in the West, their military industrial conglomerates have benefited from the length of this crisis. China has made itself very clear, its position very clear on this issue. China believes that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries should be respected. But at the same time, China has also pointed out that the legitimate security concerns of all countries should be heard and respected, and that all efforts conducive to a peaceful political settlement of this crisis should be encouraged. And China, as you know, is now a major country on the international stage and knows how important credibility is. So China has stood by these words. China has made promises it can keep, and it has been keeping these commitments and these promises. This has been China's official and constant stance on this matter. And I think history, if we look at history, history has taught us that all wars come to an end, no matter how long they run. And chances are that this unfortunate situation, this unfortunate crisis in Ukraine will also come to an end with negotiations and agreements. I think it's very unfortunate that we haven't seen real sincerity on the ground for that moment to come, which is really regrettable. How will that moment come? First of all, you will need a ceasefire. You will need a halt to all military actions on the ground as a gesture of goodwill. And then you will need a draw-up, a list of conditions acceptable to both sides. So what China is doing is that it has always been advocating for the political settlement and a peaceful solution to that, but China cannot control the conditions on the ground. China cannot control that the two parties involved in this crisis are willing to usher in the end. And that is really unfortunate here.
Because there's really is a lot of sensitivity surrounding the timing of this visit. Is supposed to be followed by the visit by Russian President Vladimir Putin to China, and also U.S. President Joe Biden's visit to France. So the world is watching, and pursuing peace in this conflict, the Ukraine conflict, and conflict between Palestine and Israel. Different countries have been trying to come to the ceasefire agreement, but then for President Macron, he's really looking to use this opportunity to try to, honor the Olympic truce, because France is hosting the Olympic Games this summer, and he wishes that an agreement could be made on the ground to bring peace to these regions.
And speaking of not just this region, but also Middle East, do you think there's a possibility that China at this point can also play some role in terms of, bringing some end to the ongoing hostilities, especially in Gaza?
Well, China has wanting to play a mediator in the tensions in the Middle East and successfully and before. But I think it's up to Israel and Hamas in this matter to really to find that consensus that is lacking here, to find that sincerity that is lacking here. I mean, a lot of hope is being pinned on mediators in regional conflicts over the past couple of years, but mediators' roles are limited, and they depend on the sincerity, and they depend on the political will of the true parties that are involved in the crisis. So I get, I really get those expectations that China could play a bigger role, but a lot of the times you see China honoring the UN Charter, China honoring UN Security Council resolutions. China wants to bring peace and stability in the most legitimate, fair, and just way, but it takes more than just a mediator for that to happen.
Now, Wang, let me come to you and probably get your perspective on China's space ambitions. And since you were in the news as well, you were covering the recent Chang'e 6 mission for the CGTN. Let me actually ask you, what do you really think is China's really the long-term game as part of its space exploration and its mission to the moon? Because it does appear that China does plan on having a long-term presence on the moon surface as well as sending astronauts to the moon. So could you sort of spell out what does that long-term plan really look like when we speak of China?
Again, Usama, but with the recent Chang'e 6 mission, because this is really a historic mission in the sense that it's going to bring back lunar samples from the far side of the moon for the first time in human history. I mean, there have been missions in the past bringing back samples, but all have been from the near side of the moon, where direct line of communications, side of line communications are available, and that will certainly simplify operations there. So I covered the launch earlier this month. It was a breathtaking moment. We all had to hold our breath, at the countdown and immediately after blast off. I mean, there's a lot of excitement, certainly. And if all goes well and trust all is well, the Chang'e 6 will land on the far side of the moon later this month. It's right now embarking on its 53-day journey. And the Chang'e 6 will land on the far side of the moon, the South Pole, the Aitken region, which is considered a key for our understanding of the formation and the evolution of the moon. For example, how and when large objects pelted the moon billions of years ago. And that's certainly amazing. So scientists are really anticipating that lunar sample, about 2 kilograms of the soil that the Chang'e 6 will bring back to Earth, will shed some more light on our understanding of the Earth. And of course, paving the way for future exploration of space. Right. So we are talking about a technically challenging mission here, but China is not alone in this endeavor. We do have international payloads this time, and one of the international payloads is from Pakistan. Its first ever satellite mission, CubeSat, was on board the Chang'e 6. The iCubeQ and the orbiter separated near the far side of the moon and really subsequently captured the first image. And this is remarkable success because it not only marks the completion of Pakistan's first lunar mission, but also it marked the beginning of this model of cooperation between China and Pakistan in space exploration in the future. Now, going back to your question, what's the plan? China plans to send the Chang'e 7 mission in 2026. It could possibly include a rover and a small flying probe to find evidence of the existence of water from the far side of the moon. And then 2 years later, in 2028, the Chang'e 8 will be a more complex and challenging mission. And along with all the previous Chang'e missions, it could hopefully build the initial international lunar research base on the moon. So that will certainly eventually pave the way for a manned mission by 2030.
And now sort of looking towards the future, 2 decades or 3 decades down the line, or perhaps it could be sooner. Wang, my question is, when we actually speak of the great power competition, we certainly see it manifesting in form of geopolitics and, different parts of the world between great powers and upcoming powers also. But when we speak of the moon itself, we have countries like U.S., China, Russia, all of them are sort of doubling down on their plans to, send manned, unmanned resources on the moon's surface. Do you think there's likely to be some kind of a possibility where, this competition can spill over in areas like the resources of the moon itself, the surface of the moon itself, the territory of the moon itself? And do you see any possibility of, that same competition that is taking place on Earth land up all the way on the moon itself between United States, China, and Russia, or other powers?
That's certainly something I found intriguing, and I would ask exactly the same question to my guest. But before we get to it, let's first ask, why are countries going back to Earth? I mean, we've done that. Humanity made it there. Neil Armstrong and Aldrin Buzz had this moonwalk half a century ago. So why are countries have this renewed interest in this celestial body a long time afterwards? The concept of space race really is something of the past. When the former Soviet Union and the United States competed for space might during the Cold War, then why now? Countries around the world are trying to repeat that mission or have this renewed interest in the moon decades after. The game changer is, of course, the discovery of water on the moon, because previously scientists believed that the moon was barren land and it was just colossally expensive to send astronauts up there and keep them alive. But then the discovery of water, the existence of water, however, opened up vast array of possibilities. For example, with access to water, astronauts could survive for longer periods of time. It could sustain, long-term research bases without relying on expensive materials transported from Earth to the moon. And the moon could one day become a refueling station for rockets and perhaps a springboard for our deeper exploration into space. Now, these ambitions are real and they are shared by humanity. And most importantly, they take time. So China plans to send astronauts to the moon by 2030, NASA in 2026. China doesn't see this as a space competition because it follows its own path and its own pace. Lunar exploration is certainly a prerequisite for understanding the vast reaches of the universe, and every step along the way could really be critical for our understanding of the universe. And every step along the way is also new frontier for China. The U.S., on the other hand, is different. Been there, done that. So the two countries are now on different footing. What we do know is the fact that when China says it's committed to collaborating with different nations and the joint exploration, peaceful exploration of space, and built a shared community in space, NASA is banned by U.S. law of having any forms, indirect or direct forms of collaboration with China. So this is certainly a different story. And if we look at the bigger picture, in the past few years, it's not only China's pursuit or the United Nations pursuit, it's this ambition to the moon shared by countries around the world. Japan, South Korea, the UAE, and Russia, and India have all sent spacecrafts to the moon with varying degrees of success. So will countries compete for resources on the moon? We don't know. But I think it depends on the mentality, whether we're looking at this from the perspective of individual countries, or are we looking at it from the perspective of humanity as a whole? And then down the line, there's something legally binding. The Outer Space Treaty in 1967 is a cornerstone of international space law, which details the rules governing the peaceful exploration of space, and over 100 countries are signatories to this treaty. So hopefully, when countries reestablish their presence on the moon, they could certainly have this opportunity to explore instead of exploiting the moon.
And talking about mentality, because the Cold War mentality is so unpopular right now in the world over, in the spheres of geopolitics and trade, my bet is on us not repeating history, on us not repeating another arms race, on members of the international community not fighting for resources in outer space. And I think, China has made remarkable strides in its space program over the last decade, both with lunar exploration and with the construction of its own space station. People take notice of the progress, but sometimes people neglect key messages that China has been sending with its success in its space program. And that key message is openness. I mean, China has been advocating for building a community with a shared future for mankind. And that goes the same with its space program. It wants to make its space program as open as possible. China has promised to invite international foreign astronauts to be part of its international space station. And as Mangmang was pointing out, the international elements involved in China's space program will only be more. I think as China goes down this road of more space progress, people will see that happening more often, and probably will become more clear to them that this is not just about China. This is not just about any individual country trying to have that outer space dominance. This is about China wanting to benefit the entire community with a shared future.
And so Wang and Zhong, my question then is, do you think there's a possibility of building that conversation forward in terms of, bringing about some kind of an agreement between great powers in terms of how to go about, approaching exploration of the moon itself? Do you think there should be some kind of a conversation along those lines in order to prevent that kind of competition sort of spilling over up at the moon itself?
There's a lot of sensitivity surrounding this first mover advantage, meaning that whoever gets to the moon first will have, a bigger say in the future exploration of the moon. But that's not the case, because China has always been advocating for international cooperation in the peaceful joint exploration of space, not only in terms of the Chang'e missions to the moon, but also the construction of the International Space Station, as Zhong Shi just mentioned. And we also mentioned the Chang'e 7 and 8. Both missions will have international payloads. So this is not the first time that China is sending technologies from other countries into space. It's always been the case, and China has been sharing the lunar sample that the previous Chang'e missions brought back from the near side of the moon with the international community for research. So I think it really has to do with the mentality, the perspective that you're looking at the space. China is trying to take its own pace. It certainly has its ambition, and it's doing this step by step. It's a no rush. But we know that NASA is the US law is banning NASA from having any sort of collaboration with China. And that, I believe, really prevents our humanity's understanding of deeper space in the future.
And now, Zhong, let me rope you in. And this is about the question of the ongoing tech decoupling between China and the US. And very recently, it came out in the news that despite US sanctions, we've had Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corp, SMIC, end up becoming, one of the second largest firms after, the Taiwan-based, chip manufacturing company in terms of its revenue itself. What do you really think that China is likely to do in terms of, ensuring that its revenue as well as, its ambitions to go forward with the chip making, both at home and abroad, are not met with the ongoing restrictions, or how is it likely to sort of bypass these restrictions in the coming future?
The US and China look at this in completely different ways. For the United States, it's tightening chip exports to China because of national security reasons, although we have not seen evidence of how US national security was undermined by China having access to US chips or advanced technology. For China, it regards this as unilateral bullying and economic coercion that essentially denies developing countries and emerging economies the right to a better life. China believes the US has overstretched the concept of national security, creating obstacles between Chinese and American enterprises. Let's not forget, American enterprises stand to lose, stand to get hurt in this process because they can't export certain parts to the Chinese market. And China is the world's largest semiconductor market. Some US companies have up to 30% of their revenue coming from the Chinese market, from selling to the Chinese market. So they stand to lose. And China sees this as unjust, unnecessary, and unfair. So, of course, Chinese companies are moving toward embracing domestic replacements and therefore creating a self-sufficient ecosystem that could, in the long term, be immune to restrictions like this. In the short term, can facilitate the healthy growth and development of China's own chip industry. I'm not a chip expert. I can't tell you on a technical level how Chinese companies are going to catch up. And but I can tell you that, remember in August last year when a Chinese telecom giant Huawei put out a new smartphone that reportedly surprised Washington because the chip powering that phone showed a level of self-sufficiency that Washington obviously previously had not known. I think chances are a lot of those surprises are down the pipe because, and it's not just me saying that, the entire US strategic community has reached consensus that banning chip exports to China, restricting chip exports to China will only delay China's advancement and development in its chip industry. It will not put a complete halt to China's chip industry. So a lot of those surprises could be down the pipe here. And China, of course, has taken notice of the potential impact and harm these restrictions can do. And therefore, in its an AI Plus initiative, AI Plus campaigns, because AI chips obviously have the higher risk of being restricted. So in China's own domestic campaigns to facilitate its AI development, it's accelerating that process of homegrown semiconductor capabilities, and all of these external pressures are only going to facilitate and expedite that process.
And so, Zhong, then there's one lead question that does come to my mind. Do you see that intensification, going forward in terms of, restrictions on China by US and its partners? Or do you think there's a likelihood, given that phase does pan out for a brief period of time or for a few years, and then you see these two countries coming together and having some kind of a conversation to sort of, dial down on that kind of, that kind of movement that they're making in terms of, on chip development or chip manufacturing? Do you think some consensus could arrive between the two countries? Because it certainly seems that competition or that confrontation is likely to affect other countries also, countries like Pakistan, countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, and so many other regions also, including continents like Africa. So what do you really see going forward?
I'm really hoping for more cooperation instead of confrontation. And I think before long, Washington will realize its attempts to contain China's advancements in chip industry will be pretty much futile. And in fact, let me point out that Washington has not been successful in persuading US allies to also join Washington in curbing technology exports to China. We're talking about the Netherlands. We're talking about US's traditional Asian allies here, South Korea and Japan, who wants to be independent in their decision when it comes to the exports of chips, when it comes to chip cooperation, technological cooperation with China, because they recognize the potential in the Chinese market. They also recognize that the benefits of cooperation far outweigh potential risks here. So I think I'm hoping for more cooperation, but I think until the US sees that all of these restrictions will come back and hurt American companies severely, they're not going to come around. So I have my hopes and expectations on cooperation, but in the short term, at least with this administration, that will be very difficult to come by.
And now, Wang, let's come to this very important question of China and Pakistan relations. Both countries have recently held a strategic dialogue in terms of reviving their, the cooperation on China-Pakistan economic corridor and sort of resuming its very next phase. And then both countries are likely to mark their 74 years of diplomatic relations this year. And in all this context, we've recently seen, terror attacks take place against Chinese nationals inside Pakistan, particularly those very Chinese nationals who are actually part of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. Do you really think the terror attacks that have been taking place are likely to bring about any kind of dent in the commitment of China itself, in terms of working on these projects, or China is likely to sort of scale down its footprint? What do you really see and think about this, sitting over there in Beijing? And what's your view on this situation or on these developments?
Well, security is certainly a major concern. These terror attacks on Chinese nationals and projects in Pakistan have certainly, hindered progress and disrupted progress of the CPEC. And ensuring the safety of personnel as well as infrastructure is crucial for the two sides to continue their cooperation under the CPEC framework at full speed. And then having said that, though, I think it's also important to know that the recent slowdown, as I mentioned, is not only a result of these terror attacks. These two countries have to deal with their own, economic challenges, political changes, as well as geopolitical uncertainties. So right now, there's a lot of talk about the CPEC 2.0, or as you mentioned, the second phase of CPEC. The cooperation between China and Pakistan, as we know, has been very multidimensional, covering almost every aspect. And they have completed the 10-year very intense cooperation under the CPEC framework, and that was the first phase, with a primary focus on infrastructure and energy. And these two are the most important ingredients for basically any developing country to grow rapidly. Now, moving on to the second stage, the two sides have agreed to focus, to shift their attention to some new sectors. And as you mentioned, the strategic dialogue was really a push in the right direction. They've agreed to establish more economic corridors under the CPEC framework. That includes the corridor of job creation, and it also includes the corridor of innovation, of green energy, and inclusive regional development. I mean, CPEC projects have always brought with them jobs, with sometimes the projects, more than half of the staff being local hires. And then as for green energy, Pakistan certainly hopes to make clean energy a bigger share of energy mix. And I'm under the impression that it's hoping to generate 60% of its energy from renewable resources by year 2030. And it certainly needs investments and a lot of technological know-how for that to happen. And here, China has a role to play as the world's most important contributor of green energy. It certainly has a lot of expertise to share with the Pakistani side. Already there are solar, hydro, wind, and nuclear power plants being built across Pakistan, and certainly more are down the pipeline. And hopefully with this renewed commitment, the two sides will expedite this green transition. So analysts are optimistic that CPEC 2 really symbolizes not only a continuation, but the evolution and the elevation of cooperation between China and Pakistan.
Well, Wang, there's a lot of potential to sort of, explore different avenues under the rubric of China-Pakistan economic corridor itself. What do you really think the two countries can really do together in order to overcome or combat different kind of threats emanating from terrorism itself, two CPEC projects and also two Chinese nationals in Pakistan.
China has condemned these terror attacks and has urged the Pakistani government to hold the perpetrators accountable. And the Pakistani government, including top officials, have visited these sites of terror attacks, expressed condolences to the victims and their families, and also renewed their commitment to improving the overall security situation in the country. It also believes that these attacks are, quote unquote, a part of a bigger plan to damage the country's economic interests and sabotage ties between China and Pakistan. So the third party could play a role here, but let's not forget that security has always been a big part of bilateral cooperation, and with a high degree of trust and frequent military exchanges to fight terrorism and maintain peace and security in that region. The Chinese community in Pakistan are, of course, very much concerned about the situation. They had to change their daily routines to avoid some of similar incidents from happening. So I believe that with this political will and wisdom, and as well as the military trust, the two sides could figure out a feasible plan to bring peace back to the region and to really secure the safety of Chinese personnel and their projects there.
And now, Zhong, let me rope you in. And this is about, speaking of China itself and the kind of plans that it has for future, especially its economy at home. Recently we've had the two sessions this year, and President Xi addressed the session by focusing on one of these, central policies on the economic issue itself, and that was new productive forces. Now, this actually comes at a time when China is, facing the threat of economic decoupling, as well as, businesses that are diversifying their investments away from China and, investing in other countries to sort of minimize this risk to their investments. Could you explain what is the policy of new productive forces and what does it really plan to achieve?
You mentioned new quality productive forces twice in your question. You'd have to look at your note. I know it's a mouthful. And in fact, even reporting this to our domestic audience, we had our fair share of explaining to do. So bear with me here. Some of my foreign guests seem to suggest that maybe innovative productivity is an easier way to understand this concept. This concept first brought up by the Chinese president in September last year, so it's a relatively newly coined term. What it refers to is advanced productivity that is freed from old growth models, and new quality productive forces is featured by new high quality, high efficiency, and high technology. It's new because it aims for high quality growth driven by innovation. Let me give you an example for that. China's new trio of industries, we're talking about China's EVs, lithium batteries, and photovoltaic products, have been so successful. They're being exported in bulk to the rest of the world. They are the improved sectors from traditional sectors using exactly new quality productive forces that is marked by innovation, right? So the transforming those traditional sectors, China's new trio of sectors have been successful. They register an exports volume of over 1 trillion yuan a year, and a year-on-year increase of about 30%. Another example would be the green color attached to new quality productive forces, because they aim for high-quality development with a green color in the background. Green is the color that really marks China's next phase of development, which we call high-quality development. And so green is the color for new productive forces as well. China obviously is trying to deepen its transition to greener and lower carbon growth here. So new productive forces really try to strike that balance that between economic development and environmental protection, and try to create that harmonious coexistence between man and nature. So overall, this is a relatively new term that speaks to innovative productivity that is now considered the engine and the power behind the next phase of the Chinese economic development.
On this note, Zhong and Wang, I really thank you so much for having joined us today on InferTalks, and thank you so much once again.
Usama.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for this conversation with Zhong Shi and Wang Mangmang. Our team works very hard to make this work possible, and it would mean the world if you could like and share our content. And if you'd like to stay informed about our upcoming podcasts and other work, please hit the bell icon.